preaching. It's okay if it happens when I do it. Look at verse 8, near midnight. You've got one of these church members falling asleep as Paul is speaking. And note what it says in verse 8. Gives us a little bit of detail of the room. There were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered. And a young man named Eutychus, sitting at the window, sank into a deep sleep as Paul talked still longer. See, it happens to Paul here. And listen, I'm going to tell you, this is just the inevitability, and if this lands a little close to home, I'm not picking you out of the lineup, okay? But every church has at least one sleeper. Every church, right? Somebody in this room, maybe even now, has already entered into a deep slumber, all right? Don't look around. Don't point anybody out. They know who they are, at least they will, all right? But in every church that I've pastored, we have had at least one sleeper. In my last church, we had a guy who dozed off every service. He would sit in the choir, and he would doze off, and he would greet me at the door on the way out and say, "Great message, Pastor." You know? I don't know why it is that the sleeper is often in the choir. You may have wondered why we dismiss our choir. You laugh, but there's a real story behind this. We dismiss our choir because a few years ago, right after I arrived, we actually had two services that would occur simultaneously. We had the church in the big room right here, and we had this is sort of our choir and orchestra service, and we had a contemporary service that met next door. And I sort of shuttled between the two. I would do a greeting in here, and then go over next door to our fellowship center and do a greeting to that service. And then I would come over here and I would preach the message, and then we would send sort of TiVo the message next door, and they watched on the video screen. Well, there's a reality when it comes to television that you have no depth. You know, depth is eliminated. And so here I would be at the front of the auditorium of the stage, and the choir would sit all the way in the back, 20, 30 feet behind me, but you couldn't tell. It gave the appearance that the choir was about 10 feet behind me. And we had someone that, well, nodded off from time to time, right? And you've seen this before. You would see someone that would start to nod off. Maybe it's been you. Maybe this has been you. You know, preacher's preaching, and he's going to town, and they wake up, and suddenly they're startled a little bit more, and then finally their head hits their chest, right? Does that hit close to home to anybody? Raise your hand if you're not asleep. All right, look around, see who's not raising their hand, right? Sleep's going to happen. I believe that it happens to the best of us. There are a lot of things that are going on. Maybe you've had a long week. Maybe you were in the yard a long time yesterday. Maybe you stayed up just a little bit longer than you should have the night before. Maybe you're taking some medication. Maybe just a little bit too much medication, right? Maybe it gets a little warm in the room. We've all been there. It happens. It happens to the best of us. But it does happen to some of you more than others, granted. But it does happen. And I've had some people come out and apologize to me. Pastor, you may have seen, I'm sorry. Let me give you a little bit of insider baseball about me, because from time to time people think that I see more than I do when I'm preaching. I sort of enter into a zone. I'm sure you're all beautiful people, but I normally do not focus in on faces. I know you're out there, but I am easily distracted. So if you start making faces at me, you're going to stop me dead in the tracks. So I sort of look and quickly look. I try not to hone in on faces. So if you've ever fallen asleep on me, I didn't know. So don't come admit it to me, okay? Don't do it. But it's going to happen. And it happened in this particular story. This congregation is eating a meal. It wasn't just the Lord's Supper. As a part of their gathering, they had what was known as an agape fellowship, an agape meal. It's just a potluck. They would bring food together and share in fellowship one with another. And Paul, after all of this, he is wound up with lots to say. And it's inevitable that somebody's going to fall asleep. But the one who did it was Eutychus. His stomach was likely full. Lots of lamps are burning in the room. Let me tell you why that's significant. They're doing it so that people can see one another, but when you have too many lamps in the room, it starts to burn up the oxygen in the room. And it can make, you're not getting as much oxygen. It's depleting some of that energy that you normally are using, and it can cause you to be a little sleepy. And then you got the flickering of the lights, which can be a little bit mesmerizing. Maybe he is sensing it. Maybe he's, startled himself about to fall asleep. So he thought, well, I just need some fresh air. And he makes his way over to a window. Maybe get a little bit of cooler air and breathe that in. And maybe that will help him. But Paul kept talking on and on and on. Eutychus was lulled into a sleep. And all of this leads to an unfortunate accident there in verse 9. It says, and being overcome by sleep, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. Now, there's some debate over, as what you see, what follows here, as to whether or not Eutychus actually died or was just severely knocked unconscious, or just maybe he just appeared to have died. But you got to remember who is the writer of the book of Acts. This is Luke, Dr. Luke, the physician. And there are times throughout the book of Acts where it shifts to the third person and sometimes back to the first person. And even at the beginning, verse 7, notice that it says we, right? So Luke, who's penned the entire book, at times is with Paul, and at times he's not. On this occasion, it is we. We are here. We are in Troas. So Luke is present. He is seeing this. He is observing this. So there is a physician on the scene. And if anyone would have been able to determine if somebody had died or not, it would have been Dr. Luke. And as far as he could tell, Eutychus was dead. By the way, you know what the name Eutychus means? Ironically, it means fortunate. Right? And in this moment, his name doesn't appear to help him very much. He definitely isn't getting away with sleeping. He falls asleep while Paul is preaching and speaking, fell right out of the third story window to his death. And I can just well imagine, if had the Lord not intervened here, what his tombstone would have read, something like, dearly departed Eutychus, death by sermon, right? Nobody wants to die that way.